This may be the most underrated superpower in the animal kingdom. Salamanders can regrow entire body parts. That's right. If they lose a finger, they can regrow it. Lose an eye, no problem. They got another one growing underneath. And if they lose their tail, well, then that just becomes food for someone else. You heard me right, because salamanders don't get a new tail, but the old tail gets eaten by other animals like ants. So they actually have two different ways to escape being ants' dinner. I guess lizards also get a second chance at life when they lose their tails, because then the tail gets eaten and the lizard doesn't. But yeah, salamanders, I guess I owe you an apology. I said lizards were the real MVPs of the animal kingdom, but I was wrong. Salamanders are literally the best regenerators on the planet. Salamanders are one of the few kinds of animals that can regrow more than just their tails. They can regrow their limbs and tails if they've lost them. Eyes, cornea, and even lens, parts of their heart, the spinal cord, and even parts of the brain. Yeah, there are some small fish, starfish, and flatworms that can completely regenerate too, but salamanders are among the very few vertebrates that can do this. It blows my mind that there's any vertebrate on the planet that can't regenerate, because seriously, how are we supposed to live with ourselves knowing that we can't even regrow a finger? Oh wait, we already know. We know we can't because we can't. But anyway, the way salamanders pull this off is really incredible. When a salamander loses a body part, the wound does not heal over, leaving a scar. Instead, the cells around the wound revert back to a stem cell-like state, which makes them despecialize. They become basically blank slate cells again, which can develop into any kind of tissue. These despecializing cells gather together at the wound site and form a mass called a blastema. This blastema grows and eventually develops into bone, muscle, blood vessels, nerves, everything needed to restore full function to the missing body part. They're like the ultimate comeback kids. No, literally, they come back with better tails. When a lizard loses its tail, it can't grow it back at all. Or if it does, the new tail isn't anything like the old one. For example, it's made of cartilage instead of bone, which means it has growth plates, allowing the tail to keep growing longer throughout the lizard's life. And that's great for the lizard because a longer tail is good for balance and also for attracting mates. But since the new tail grows from the same tissue that's responsible for growth, it never replaces the lost vertebrae and muscles. So while it might be handy for mating, the lizard will always be tailless when it comes to escaping predators. A new tail simply doesn't have the same survival benefits as the original. And here's why. In order to lose their tails, lizards have to actively break their own tails off. There's a special fracture point in their tail made up of weak bones and cartilage. And when a lizard loses its tail, it leaves behind a stump with a lot of jagged edges, which is pretty bad for your health. But with salamanders, the regeneration process is more complicated than just growing a new tail out of thin air, but it's also much more effective. Instead of just growing out a piece of cartilage, the new tail is almost an exact replica of the old one, down to the number of vertebrae. They can even regrow the ribs attached to their spine, which is something lizards can't. Of course, the regenerated tail isn't perfect. Like, there's no way a salamander could regrow an eye that perfectly matches the other one. But even the regenerated tails aren't perfect replicas. They have some differences compared to the originals, but unlike lizards, the difference is mostly skin deep. So, what exactly does it take to master this art of regeneration? Well, aside from lots and lots of practice, salamanders need a lot of energy to fuel their regeneration. Regrowing a body part is metabolically expensive. But in exchange for all those extra calories they burn, they get all these cool benefits, like reduced scarring and an increased resistance to infections. Some species of salamanders can even resist fatal infections by simply shedding their skin, sort of like shedding the t-shirt you were about to throw away anyway. But there's still so much we don't know about how salamanders do this. And scientists don't know if there are any other animals besides salamanders that can regrow a complex organ with structures that are almost identical to the original. It's hard to figure out whether or not a new organ is actually the same as the original. We can see that the new tails work okay, but it's hard to compare them to the originals. And we can see that the new eyes look pretty similar to the originals, but it's hard to tell if they're actually the same. So there's still a lot of debate about whether or not salamanders are the ultimate regenerators. But what scientists lack in answers, they make up for in enthusiasm. Over the past few decades, scientists have been studying salamanders to try to understand the regeneration process and figuring out how to make it happen in other animals, especially us. Now, obviously, we humans can't regrow our tails, but we can regrow parts of our skin. And that's a start. But what scientists really want to know is how salamanders can bring back whole body parts, like limbs and spinal cord. Spinal cord injuries are unfortunately fairly common. About half of the people who experience them end up with permanent disabilities. And the damage usually can't be undone. And heart attacks are also fairly common. And right now, the only treatment options focus on preventing another one from happening. But if we had a way to get patients to regenerate their heart tissue, we could potentially reverse heart attacks entirely. Wouldn't that be amazing? We'd finally stop having to say sorry to the heart attack survivors at the funeral. But before we make any human clinical trials, scientists first tried making tadpoles regenerate their spinal cords. Tadpoles are salamanders, so they should be able to do it. But even they can't regenerate their spinal cords. What gives? Turns out they need a little help. Scientists found that if they transplanted spinal cord stem cells into the tadpoles, then they could regenerate their spinal cords. So the key to regeneration is reprogramming cells into stem cells. But how exactly do you reprogram cells? Well, scientists aren't sure yet, but they think it involves chemicals, possibly coming from bacteria that live in the wound. Now, getting human cells to turn back into stem cells would be huge. It would open up all sorts of medical possibilities, not just regeneration. Right now, we have stem cell therapies for some diseases where the patient has to receive stem cells from someone else. But if we could just use the patient's own cells, then there would be no risk of rejection and no need to find a donor. And if we ever want to regrow limbs, we'll probably need to start with salamanders. Lizards can't do it, but salamanders can regrow a whole limb in 4 steps. First, a blood clot forms at the wound site to seal off the severed blood vessels. Next, immune cells rush to the wound to clean up the mess. Then the cells at the wound site start to despecialize. And finally, the blastema forms and begins to develop into a new limb. But right now, we're not quite ready to start transplanting limb cells. We don't fully understand how salamanders do it, but it's only a matter of time until we crack this code too. Now we have decoded the secrets of this fruit. Thank you for watching.